Hello everybody and welcome to another Regcast. Today I am your host Lucy Sherriff and we are here to talk about an enterprise view of the cloud. This isn't the kind of cloud you buy with your credit card. This is the proper private cloud, full bells and whistles and all the bits of shiny things that we like to talk about so much. We're very lucky we've got Garry here from Unilever to talk us through the processes and pitfalls of embarking on a private cloud project when you're a big company. But before that, let's do a few more introductions. As I said, I'm Lucy Sherriff, I'm your host. We've got Puja here from Avanade, who are the consulting firm that worked with Unilever on their project. We have Garry Meaburn here from Unilever, and of course we have the inimitable Andy Buss from our old friends at Freeform Dynamics, who is here to give us the voice of the Reg readership, really, more than anything else. And as ever, we have you. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you guys, so you need to join in. If you look above my head, you will see a few buttons that you can click on. One of those says send in questions, so please send in your questions, and I will put them to our very illuminating panel. So thanks everyone for joining us. Garry, shall we kick off with, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of what you do at Unilever in your IT role?
Yeah, most certainly. So our department is responsible for delivering the infrastructure for enterprise computing. So the aim of what we're trying to do within the project was actually to support the business, actually developing what it needs for rapid deployment. So what we're trying to achieve with this project is the ability to be able to support the business and how it's growing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so are you kind of, which bit of the IT setup are you responsible for at Unilever? Because I imagine it's not all one unit, is it?
Yeah, so we're responsible for the infrastructure delivery.
Okay.
So we will deliver the supporting infrastructure, be it Wintel, be it Unix, to actually support the business. And
Puja, Avanade is the consulting partner that Unilever worked with on this project. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background about what you guys do and who you work with typically?
Sure. So just a brief background on Avanade. We were formed in the year 2000 by Microsoft and Accenture, and we specialize in Microsoft technologies. And the main thing is that we help build the business value for our customers along with the solutions that we provide in the Microsoft space. And that's the knowledge and expertise that we've brought to bear to Unilever in the journey that we've been on with them on the private cloud.
And do you typically work with larger end companies and global scale, or are you kind of dealing with everybody from the mum and pop up?
So as you can tell, with the heritage we have, naturally it comes the enterprise customers. So yes, that's where we naturally play, but we do have customers across the range.
Yeah. Okay. So taking a big company into a private cloud, this is not something you do in one step. This is very much a procedure, a journey. Andy, can you kind of set the scene a little bit for us? What's going on in the market that people need? Is there something that people are needing to do? Why would you mess with what works?
Well, I think one of the things is the world keeps changing, so we can't keep doing the same things we do again and again. And one of the things which we'll touch on a little bit later is, for example, how IT can best work with the business to deliver value. And one of the ways that we're starting to see things happen is by IT becoming sort of a bit more responsive and agile. And there's different ways it can do this by becoming better. So either it can develop internally and develop skills and expertise, or it can rely on external partners to help develop this. But what we've started to see in the research we've done, in the Reg readership and broader as well, is that the internal IT has moved very much from a fixed static infrastructure of a few years ago. While that's still in place and still, to be frank, the dominant area today still, because it stays in place a long time, we're starting to see new options come to the table. So new ways to approach old problems and new ways to tackle the emerging problems. So one of those is that you can go to external partners, put things in hosted data centers. That was popular a few years ago to add capacity, etc. But now that's becoming, again, more dynamic, and so we're starting to see that what's called the public cloud, both sort of a semi-private one in a local hoster or a big AWS or Google, for example, as a public provider. And on the other side, we're starting to see overhauls in how we approach changing the fixed static infrastructure to becoming a more dynamic pool of IT resources. And that's leading us towards this concept of private cloud, where everything is dynamic, on demand. It can be automated, it is fluid, and you can make much better use of your infrastructure. Now, we're still early days, to be frank. There's a lot of hype, a lot of claims about it. Never ever. But we've seen a pickup, to be frank. In the research we've done, we have started to see a big pickup, and mostly in the private cloud, but also now with external services such as SaaS and PaaS services, and now a hybrid as well. So we're starting to see really the first joinings of the internal infrastructure with external infrastructure. But again, not to overhype that is still small, but people are starting to do it and reasonably successfully.
Yeah. Okay. And to an extent, I think I can echo to Andy's point there, because what we're seeing in our customers and in multiple environments is that people are moving from that fixed infrastructure, which is more a reactive IT, where you're reacting to problems, where they have physical, dedicated environments, non-shared infrastructure, limited monitoring, to moving to the next layer where you're saying, well, let's have an optimized data center, in which you are trying to get a shared infrastructure in place. You're trying to get at least server-based monitoring in place, trying to be semi-automated, if not take it the entire way, and then finally putting more management principles or controls in place and move to more like a private cloud where you can be automated to a great extent. You can move from a server to service-based monitoring and provide more value to the business by being more agile. So I think that's what we're seeing in the industry too, from our customers.
Yeah, and I think from an enterprise perspective, we're learning out that it's a journey that we're doing this.
Yeah.
We can't do it in one jump. So what we're trying to do is lay a foundation by looking at the process, the tools, and actually then look about how we start utilising these features. Because the business is seeing from the cloud suppliers and that type of stuff, the hype around this. So they want that ability to be able to get resources, that type of stuff, on demand, the same way that they see with Amazon, etc. So it's how, from an internal IT perspective, we actually can deliver that to meet what the business needs.
So it's having to live up to the hype.
Yeah. And I think it's
not that there is any hype.
And I think one of the key things is, though, it's from an end user's perspective, they can put a credit card into a website and they can get a virtual machine, but they don't realise actually when you do that, there's all the support model around it that actually needs to be provided, all the integration into the estate. So it's how you make the business understand actually we can do that, but we can also get rid of all the pain that actually you've got about doing the integration, doing the support and all that type of stuff, because that's our function and our job.
Okay.
I think this is also changing IT's perception or business perception of IT, because you're moving from a reactive to a more proactive, to being far more agile to service business needs, or becoming really IT as providing a service to the business, which means you're really raising your platform to be a partner delivering service than being seen somebody who's doing something in the back end. So I think it's great for IT to take a step here.
It is, and I think, as we've said, it's a bit of a journey. It's very difficult to do this all at once. Some companies may have that luxury of re-architecting a whole bunch at once, but very few, to be frank, do. So it's how do you identify the near-term opportunities to get IT better and more cloud-like, and I think that's precisely the reason why we're here today, to look at an in-progress project and see what's worked and what hasn't, and what to focus on first, and then plan for the future. Because as you can see from the model of the cloud there, it is a very complex it's a very complex architecture, but you can start at the foundations and then start to build on top as time goes by.
Okay, so Garry, if I can just move us along one, why did you decide to go down this particular route? What were the challenges that you guys were facing at Unilever that it came up in conversation to begin with? Where did you start from?
So I think the key step we realised is it's a challenge from the business to meet the agility demands. We have to be responsive, we have to meet their needs. And we stepped back and looked upon ourselves and think, well, we've done virtualisation, but actually we need to go the next step and actually lay the process, the tools and all around, and automation on top of that to actually meet the needs. We also looked at how we deliver infrastructure. We needed to make sure that it was consistent. Could be delivered 24/7 if needed to actually meet peaks and troughs of project demand. So we actually just stepped back and thought, well, what's the pain points that we always get raised on projects? And actually by implementing the cloud-like processes on top of this, on our IT infrastructure, we can actually address a lot of them and actually meet what the business wants.
Okay, so this is very much a business move then, not necessarily technology for technology's sake.
Well, I think there's both ways. The business gets benefit from it, but from the technology point of view, the IT pros themselves get some benefits, because what we can do is we can do a lot of automation. We can automate a lot of the simple tasks and repetitive tasks that the guys do, and actually allow them to actually put benefit back into the business by bringing some innovation, some new ways of thinking, some improvements, that type of stuff, and making the actual IT team actually feel like they're actually driving something themselves.
And sorry, so then when you had this moment of clarity where you said, right, we can do better, so then you guys went to Avanade.
Yeah,
and you
I think
put a plan in place to kind of...
It was a partnership really between Unilever, Avanade, and Microsoft itself was involved as well.
I mean, as Andy mentioned earlier, and I think Garry said as well, it's a journey, and I think we've been on that journey with Unilever around the various stages of this journey. And we've helped with the virtualization, we've helped to put the management controls in place. So absolutely, we've been working in partnership with Microsoft and Unilever on this. It's mainly trying to address the business drivers, as Garry said, which is all around trying to be far more agile, as a way of trying to deliver services. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve together.
Yeah, and just to bring the point back, this is an emerging area and there's no one off-the-shelf solution. So we've seen companies trying to do it themselves with a lot of time and investment, but more and more it's about what commoditized tools and techniques, processes, etc. can we take use of to have a lot more standardization in place, because what's the use of reinventing the wheel every time? It actually,
if it works.
It can be better to run your old physical infrastructure with people if it's taking too much time to develop tools and processes, etc. So using an experienced blueprint or partner or provider to do this is actually a really good way to approach it, because it is a difficult and emerging area.
Okay. This is all about baby steps as well, isn't it? This is you can't just jump straight into something like this. What were the first things that you did?
I think the first thing we did, we actually stepped back and look honestly across ourselves and understand about how we deliver. So we understand where our pain points were. Then basically we then overlaid from the process, automation, the tooling, how we can actually address them bottlenecks and what we can do to actually meet the needs we do. Okay. But I think it's just laying that initial foundation. That's what we needed to do with this. And then from there we understand that it's got to be a repeatable process. So as we work through the delivery, it's not going to be just a one stop at the end of this project. It's going to be a cycle. We'll then go back, well, what's our next pain point? How do we address that? How do we simplify? How do we improve our delivery? So I think that's a model that we're trying to work to on this.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And you're in the midst of a journey, really, but already you're starting to see some good outcomes just from the investment you've already got in place?
Yeah, most definitely. So the estimates that we've seen, and from a delivery point of view, we should foresee from a server infrastructure delivery probably a 40% reduction in lead time from actually getting the infrastructure on the ground and deployed. So we've done that by using this project, changing how we provision hardware, so moving to a hardware pre-provision model, rather than each project purchasing hardware, waiting for lead time for delivery, install, but moving to using blades and a pre-provision model, laying across the automation for automated delivery, and also the wraparound with the monitoring, we can actually cut a lot of lead time. And actually from an operational perspective as well, some of the routine tasks like patch management and all that type of stuff, which is background tasks to the business but is important to keep the infrastructure running, we can simplify that as well and reduce down the resources that are required to do that, so they can spend time more picking up the exceptions rather than doing the manual tasks themselves.
So I think if you go back to the keys, if you're trying to make things, you're trying to provide to the business far quickly to the new services that they demand, you need to make IT fairly agile. To make the IT fairly agile, you can take away, I think it's a great place for the IT to step in, because it makes them take away the repetitive tasks, automate those repetitive tasks, and in the process find more strategic ways of adding value to the business. So I think it is a great play for the ITs to put a foot forward and say, yes.
And I think from the IT pro point of view as well, they learn new skills, because what they will do is that as they go into the cloud type infrastructure, their skill set is going to have to increase. So they'll have to manage, probably get some experience with more storage, with a network layer, but also looking at how we do automation. So it's no point just looking at the technical aspects in automation. You actually need to understand the process and understand how we can improve it. So they gain a greater insight then into process improvement, that type of stuff. And it's purely not just I won't be doing much now because it's going to be all automated. Actually, it gives them time to do a lot of adding benefit back into the business.
Okay. We've got a couple of questions. Let's go. Gary Collins says, what percentage of virtualization have you achieved and what is your ultimate goal?
I think realistically we won't end up with 100% virtualized, but I think we're aiming between the 70 to 80% virtualization.
And on your way there?
Yeah, what we do now is it's virtualization by default, and we only use physical by exception. But I think one important message is, though, that we manage with this private cloud project, we're going to manage our physical and virtual infrastructure the same way.
Okay.
So it just, because we didn't want to increase process complexity by trying to running them as separate estates, we can actually get the benefit of the cloud-like processes applied to physical and virtual estate. Okay. So to us, it's just a resource pool that we will assign the workload to where it's appropriate.
Okay. And then this is, I think, probably a question for you, Puja. Is private cloud viable for a smaller outfit? What, you kind of...
Yes. No, I guess it really depends upon what private cloud means. You can't, as Andy said, you can't just go for nirvana day one.
Yeah.
There are small steps that you can take in order to reach there. So it's about knowing strategically where you want to go. What do you want to achieve? Are you trying to be more agile in terms of servicing your business needs? Are you trying to become better in terms of the way you operate and manage your environment today? Knowing your end objectives, you can define small steps to get there. I mean, an organization we were talking to, and they said, well, we actually forget about automation. We don't have well-defined processes. We still have a checklist, a person who runs through at 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock and actually checks all the servers are working and everything's happening. For a small organization, just take that, automate it, give that person something more strategic to look at, which can help you service the business better. So absolutely, I think regardless of the scale of the organization, the infrastructure, the investment you make to get there will be different, but you can always make small steps to improve the way you service business.
It's about being cloud-like as well as being cloudy.
It is, and also let's not forget that sort of certain small businesses are very tech-centric.
Yeah.
They may have very heavy use of systems and services, and it may make sense to do so. But for others, there's also the option of going, say, for an external provider that runs what we call a virtual private cloud. So it's in an external facility, often maybe even managed by them, but it's dedicated to you. And so you can move a lot of workloads into that. And I've spoken to a number of sort of managed service providers that do this type of service, and many businesses of less than 1,000 people, in fact less than 500 people, that make extensive use of these types of services. So private cloud is not just for the very big, but it depends on the demands being placed on the technology infrastructure.
Okay. Let's
so
take a little view at the general IT and business relationship here.
Yeah, so one of the main drivers for Garry was to increase the responsiveness and agility of IT to move to private cloud. And this is something that we actually see in the broader Reg readership, so we thought it was important to highlight, because this is not just for the biggest, most demanding organisations. It's a problem across the IT industry and across many businesses.
Yeah, because, of course, if it wasn't, then Dilbert wouldn't exist.
Absolutely. And so this slide, for example, we did a recent research study into this, and we were looking at how well-equipped IT organisations are to respond to requests for change from the business. And to be frank, very few companies were well-equipped to do this. It was a fraction of 10% really that overall that felt that they were well equipped to do this. And if we move on to the next slide, we can really see the impact behind this, because we then looked at how well they utilise the investments they make in IT infrastructure. And if you imagine the red here being least cloud-like and green being most cloud-like in terms of the policies, processes, efficiency, capacity, etc., and how they use IT. So we're going towards a more cloud-like approach from the bottom to the top. But what stood out really was that the more cloud-like environments were much more responsive to change requests, etc. But also that the business got much happier with the service being provided as well. And that tended to lead to things like much more investment coming back into IT. IT allowed a more freer rein because it was trusted as a partner of the business and not just viewed as a black box that was sucking money out and not run very well. So it was open, more trusted, more credible, and overall it was a virtuous cycle. So this is one of the reasons, again, to start thinking more cloud-like. You don't have to put a full cloud in place, but to move yourself from red to green is really the aim over time.
Take the checklists away from the guys running around with their servers and make the computers do the stuff computers were supposed to do.
No, I agree. I think we tell most customers that you may not be going there, but think about that end objective of trying to get there, and then what you can do in order to get into the journey. So absolutely agree with you that, that's not what you'll have day one, but that's what you should aim. You should design your environment, you should design, you put your goals behind it to get there. That'll be the key.
And I think one of the key messages we found is that small changes can make a big difference. Just because you might not have all the tooling, etc., you might be able to step back and actually look. So if you analyse the cloud process, how they work, then say, well, there might be some simple just the process changes you can do with your internal organisation that actually could speed up delivery. you might not have to invest in, you might not have the ability to invest in the tooling, but you could look at some process optimization, that type of stuff. Just step back and think, well, how can we do that? Examine what you currently do, and you're surprised some of the differences you can make.
And does that kind of stuff tend to lay the groundwork for the next step as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as then you find that, well, that had really good benefit. The business saw this improvement, IT saw this improvement as well. What can we do next? Well, if we had this tooling, or we can do this, it'll add this extra, we can automate that even better. And
gives you a bit more credibility.
Yeah, definitely.
When you're going in to talk to them. Okay, we've got a question here from Darren. This is a question we get quite a lot on these sorts of things. Isn't private cloud just a fancy term for deciding to virtualise your IT, or is there more to it?
We've already virtualised a lot of our estate. So
there you go, Darren. We've done that.
So we've got, within the Windows environment, we've got over 3,000 virtual machines already running under Hyper-V. So that was good, but in reality, you've got to step back actually and look at this and think, well, I can't manage this the same way as I do as a physical estate. We've got to play to the advantages of virtualisation. So the next step then is to lay across the automation, the improved monitoring, this type of stuff that you see in the cloud, rapid provisioning. We need to lay that across it. So it is more than virtualisation. Virtualisation is the foundation, but so can physical servers be. It doesn't have to be virtualised servers. It depends on what your requirements are. So I think that's a key message back. It's not just virtualisation, it's the next step in the journey.
Okay.
So virtualization to an extent help organizations in thinking, because it just brings the cost down, makes it far easier to provision infrastructure rather than having to buy every time and have a lead time of 4 to 6 weeks. But if you look at it, the management principles on the top that you put, the controls and the customizations that you put on top, is what is actually helping you serve your business. So it's about an IT view of what IT wants to do at a virtualization layer versus put the management layer and give the business a view of where you are heading or how you can service them.
Because the business doesn't really know if it's virtualised or physical. Their application's running.
That's
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's what we see as well. As you can virtualise as much as you like, but if you run it on the old management principles, you've still got a static infrastructure that's slightly more efficient. If you want to get the full advantage of virtualisation, it's the advanced policies, it's the automation, provisioning, etc., that enable you to be much more quicker, much more service-centric, and be able to respond quickly. So it is about the wrapping that goes around virtualisation, as well as the existing estate.
Definitely, and I think it's also a step back as well, because we were managing we set off on the Hyper-V project and we delivered that infrastructure. So as part of this private cloud project, I did a step back and actually looked at how we manage that estate. And some assumptions we made, actually, we realise now, by having this round-up view from the tooling, has allowed us to see the whole estate in one view. Well, actually, we're not driving the utilisation as much as we did. So we can make some process changes, just simple calculation changes in our capacity management, which will now give us increased utilisation on the infrastructure, so we can get more VMs on the estate by just stepping back and actually thinking, let's see what we can do now by using the tools.
Okay.
And I think one of the biggest things is this all makes a lot of sense. Why isn't everyone doing it, I think, is the question. And one of the things that we see is that IT is still geared around buying individual apps, systems and silos. Another recent survey we did, we were looking at teams and tools behind IT operations. And most companies that we surveyed had completely separate teams for the servers, for the storage, for the networking, and even for the apps. And they weren't integrated from a tools perspective or a personnel perspective. And that introduces gaps and overhead and opportunities for error and making things work at the speed of people, not at the speed of back-end policy and process. So it's a barrier in terms of becoming more cloud-like. And so part of the aim in putting cloud processes in place is to try and start to restructure the back end of IT, to put in place the platform underneath that can deliver the responsive and agile infrastructure that you can then layer your applications and services on top of. And so if we move on to the next slide, what we found again coming out of that is the most responsive IT organisations basically said, we don't have separate teams for these guys. They are unified, they're multi-skilled, they talk to each other. If they're not completely multi-skilled, they sit amongst each other and have common tools and talk to each other. So one of the biggest things to do in terms of moving towards a cloud-like environment is to start to break down the internal barriers between the different operations teams and the tools they use.
Yeah. Have you found that to be a kind of a challenge for you guys to get your IT people?
I think we've been fairly lucky because we've got, for example, the network team and the SAN team actually sit together, and all teams do talk well together. But we've seen the first step within cross-skilling where, for example, we've moved to, rather than rack mount servers, we moved into blades, and now we find that the network team will manage the network connections into the DC LAN, but the actual switches within the chassis are now managed by the Wintel team. So we're seeing that cross-skilling a little bit going on, and I think the next evolution will be within the storage components as well. And when you layer on top of that automation, it can't be done in silos. It has to be done as one end-to-end process. So that's where people then start working really well across teams because they're having to engage to actually develop the automation workflows.
Okay, we've got some more questions. This is a nice big question from Steve. What's the end objective for Unilever, and how long to get there? And what are the sub-objectives? Don't worry about the second part of that. What's your end goal? What do you right when this journey comes to its end?
I don't think it ever will, to be honest.
Okay.
I think that's a key message because by the time IT will continue to evolve, and we have to continue going through that improvement cycle. So we look about what new capabilities actually the future will bring, and actually then start utilising it. So, for example, Windows 2012. We're on the rapid deployment program for that. So we're already thinking ahead. Currently Windows 2008 R2, but we're already thinking ahead for the next version of Windows. By the time we get that deployed and steady, the next version will be coming on. So it's just a cycle. It's always a cycle of improvement.
The other way of looking at it is, what is IT there for? Servicing the business. The business is not going to stop. It's going to evolve. It will evolve more and more. IT has to always evolve to support the business. So there isn't an end game, is there?
Gary Collins says, are you considering hybrid cloud as part of your strategy?
We will basically deploy workloads where appropriate. So we will look at if it is appropriate to host a particular workload in the cloud, in the public cloud. So we do consume some services already from the public cloud, and I think in the future we'll probably do the same where we'll merge a little bit more, but it's only where it's appropriate from an enterprise point of view. Because obviously we've got the challenges of integration, security and all that type of stuff, and I think that's things that we're working through at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Question from Steve. He says, tooling is a huge element for the cloud. How do you get the business to buy into this? This kind of speaks very much to the stuff that we were talking about.
It does, and if we move on to the next slide, I think this is part of the challenge, and precisely draws to this because, again, we do surveys again and again looking at how companies are tooling up and gearing up for meeting the business challenge. And if we look at what they're saying to us when we say, what's stopping you managing your virtual IT infrastructure in a better way? They come back to us and say, well, we're overstretched. We've got far too much to do. That damn business keeps asking us to do new things. And
we're trying to maintain stuff here. Stop asking us to do stuff.
And we've got to juggle too many priorities, for example. And while those are all valid feelings and concerns that are in the way, if you look at it, they're actually symptomatic of a problem elsewhere. But that's seen as the biggest barrier to actually managing the IT infrastructure better. When we look at it, we found that these companies have completely separate tools, completely separate teams, and a lot of fragmentation between environments, leading to a lot of overhead, errors, and a cut down in speed and efficiency. And yet very few of the companies we surveyed felt that this breakdown of teams and tools, etc., was impacting their ability to manage things better. So part of it comes down to actually realising that a lot of the day-to-day operational burden is symptomatic of the fact that there isn't a good solution underpinning all of this, and that investing in that back-end infrastructure can help. The other is, of course, that applications and new things are often the things that get funded, and they're sexy and they're great and they're new and they're exciting, but getting them all linked together and working is someone else's problem. And so it's working hand in hand with the business to realise that actually if we want to deliver a better, more agile IT service to the business, we have to start putting money into that supporting infrastructure. Then you have a great platform on which to put those new apps and services, and it makes them a lot quicker and easier to do. So it does require partners, it requires a business case, it requires stubbornness and persistence as well to push this through.
I guess the way we've seen it is what you lead off the question with. Do you lead off the discussion with the business to talk about how we can improve the speed to market or make them more agile by them being able to become the business more agile by IT becoming more agile? Or do we say, well, we want to be able to monitor, manage, and know our estate better? I guess if you lead with the former, you're more likely to win the business over because they see the value they will get versus the latter. But in the process of doing the former, you will achieve the latter as well.
Yeah.
I mean, organizations have grown organically. We were just talking to one, a couple of weeks back, and they had different provisioning tool, they had a different management tool and a different ticketing tool, and none of them would talk to each other. And imagine what their IT will be doing and what they'll be busy with. And if you take a step back and again go back to the point of understanding the roadmap or the journey that you can get on and make the small steps in the right direction to get you into that integrated view for the future, you'll get there.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point actually, again from the project point of view. When we initiated it, we're seeing within the cloud tools, that type of stuff coming out, a lot of people are driving self-service platforms. And what you don't want in an enterprise point of view is islands of self-service platforms that we can't then integrate into the estate. So we made a decision that we would have one central integration point, and then no matter the landscape underneath it, if I need to do a cross-landscape delivery, my tools integrate and deploy across it, and it would then deploy and use the relevant tools but by automation. So if I've got an AIX build, as a request comes in, it would then kick off the build using the relevant tools to do it, but using the same principle as a Wintel. As soon as I need a Windows build, it would actually then use the relevant tools to deploy Windows. So we didn't want to create islands, which is one of the challenges that we see within the tool sets, within the cloud infrastructure. And that's one of the things that we set off at the very beginning not to avoid.
And to an extent, Garry, don't you think that by having that integrated platform, you have a better ability to leverage the functionality and the ability to deliver on those end results then?
Yeah, definitely, because I think from an enterprise perspective, sometimes you have to deploy landscapes. Sometimes it's not an individual Windows server, an individual Linux box. You have to deploy landscapes, and that could be using components across the whole estate. And the last thing you want to do is have that separation and actually driving up operational complexity by having different processes across different things. We need a common integration point, and that's why we're getting the benefit of this, because we thought about this from the very beginning, and everything will then plug into that one framework.
Got quite a few questions coming in now, so I'll just bat a few over. Simon asks, would you say it would be easier to draw a line in the sand against the existing way of working and start from a greenfield best practice environment, or is it better to modify existing working processes and evolve?
You have to evolve, to be honest, because if you try to start from the very beginning, you'll spend more time trying to develop that than actually getting any benefit from it. So what we've done
and
is...
you have to do your day job, while you're busy doing this anyway, don't you?
And I think what we've seen is often a small part of private cloud goes into an existing sort of static infrastructure. Workloads get deployed to that. Sometimes it's the most critical ones first, but most often it's sort of the tier 3 and 4 type apps that go on
See
that
how it works.
Get put in place, experience is gained, and then gradually as the IT infrastructure starts to evolve and natural refreshes come up, then often the cloud environment expands to encompass more and more, and over time it becomes the most used platform. So it is an evolution. Very few companies can really throw out their existing legacy.
I'm not going to do IT for 6 months, come on boys.
and as has been said, sort of taking into account the old physical architecture, and maybe some things can't be virtualized, so maybe you're looking at an Oracle instance that really is designed to run natively rather than in a virtualized environment. You can still put a lot of the management practices into place across that existing legacy physical landscape and make it better, and even bring it into the cloud environment. It may not be the full private cloud, but it's actually managed as part of the cloud overall.
Okay. And then we also have Neil says, what is more important for implementing the cloud, the platform and the technology selection, or operational experience and process optimization?
I think, to be honest, they're going hand in hand, but the first thing you've got to do is understand the process. If you deploy it from a technology point of view, the risk is that you will deploy something that isn't fit for purpose. You need to understand the processes, but you also need to step back and actually review the processes. Don't be afraid to make changes. You have to challenge it, because the last thing you want to do from a delivery perspective is have a brilliant agile environment, but if your change control takes considerable time to actually get approved and all that type of stuff, your business isn't going to see the benefit. You need to step back and review the processes, then deploy the right tooling at the right time to actually support it.
And isn't that, Gary, what you asked us as well when we initially started this thing around private cloud and automation was, we've got our set processes, we've been using them for many years, but we'd like you to take a more best practice or a good practice view of what the processes should be, and then see as to if there were any areas of improvement as we went along.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes it's good as well having that external perspective, because you get set on a particular road, and actually having that different viewpoint, it can actually open up some ideas you might not have thought about. And also allows you the ability to challenge as well. You have to challenge sometimes. If we say we do it this way because of this, we've had to challenge some teams and actually say, well, no, we need to change this and do it this way instead. And we can see the benefit from by doing this. So that was the first time when a server build automation was brought in. There was a lot of challenges about actually that happening, because it's saying it's going to be complicated, it wouldn't work. But actually now it's bread and butter for us. Our server build automation.
Okay. Steve asked, doesn't the common integration point hold up projects when automation is not yet developed in places?
The common integration point from us was a control point of view.
Okay.
We have to control what happens in the estate. So our help desk system was in place, and that was what was used for capacity requests. So we use that as a control method. So once a control method is created, then it's easy for us to do it. But we could do automation outside of that side if we needed to, because some particular tasks might not require that control mechanism. So it can be done either way, to be honest. It's based on your requirement and what actually that situation you're trying to do.
Okay. I have one here. You guys obviously are at a very early stage in what you're doing, but Elena would like to know what business benefits is Unilever already seeing from the cloud?
I think, because we're in the very beginning of it, I think the key thing they're going to see is an infrastructure delivery point of view. Is they're going to see that the faster response to actually deliver the core infrastructure. So what we'll do is we'll deliver the infrastructure, then the application team will take over then and actually do the application side. So if we can cut some of the lead time down by doing hardware pre-provisioning, automated builds, all that type of stuff, we can save 6-7 weeks off potentially a delivery of a project, which obviously has the business benefit straight away. Yeah. But then we can reverse it as well from a maintenance point of view. If we do automation on the maintenance, so we use a live migration with Hyper-V, being able to move workloads around, we can actually do a lot of maintenance on the IT infrastructure without impacting the business, which is reducing their downtime and etc. So the business will see it, but if they might not understand actually it's because of the cloud that's actually giving them benefit, but they're just seeing the improvement.
But isn't that one of the prime things you saw as well, as you had to actually go out and market all of these results out to the business to make them aware of the improvements that you'd been able to put in place?
It was a surprising learning that internal IT has to market itself. Yeah. Because they will, the business will see basically vendors, they will see the cloud, the advertising on the web, and not understand actually that internal IT can actually deliver that. And that's actually, by doing some internal marketing, they can see the actual capabilities, and they see us as a partner, not as a blocker to delivery.
And surprisingly, if I'm not mistaken, when we initially did the business case for just the automation aspect, we were talking about like a return on investment within a year. And as we're now delivering on it, we're seeing where you mentioned that there's been improvement of a certain percentage in terms of the speed of delivering the infrastructure. So we're already seeing some of those returns as we're going about delivering that.
So just kind of bringing it briefly back to the slide here, we've got the three-step approach to private cloud: simplify, automate, and enhance. Do you want to cover off any points on this that we haven't really gone through yet?
I think we worked as a partnership with Avanade to actually deliver these basically the 3 steps, and this will be a continual cycle we'll actually work through. So we've got different strands happening outside of this project. So from an architecture point of view, they're working at delivering some standard building blocks that we will then use from an operations point of view for delivery. So that piggybacks in perfectly, because what we can do in the future, if we have an architecture standard building block, we could actually look at, well, let's deliver the automation to mirror that as well. So we'll have a building block that's got the automation where appropriate wrapper around it to actually help with deployment. We stepped back and looked at utilisation across our estate from a simplified point of view. The new tooling, one of the features within the Virtual Machine Manager, it allowed me to do an holistic view across our virtualisation estate. It allowed me to see how the memory was being used. A simple process change will then free up more. We'll drive down our utilisation on the estate. We'll get more VMs on each host. And it's also looking at the processes that we did and everything else. So that's part of the simplify process. We worked through it.
In fact, when a question which was asked earlier, that isn't private cloud virtualization, if you look at that three-phase approach, that'll show you that the simplifying, consolidation, standardization all comes in the first part. But then you do have, to our point earlier, the operational layer or the operational controls which need to be put on top of it, which is what's going to give you the management benefits or the return on investment that you can show to the business. And that is where you do your automation or the management controls. And naturally what you've done is you've created a platform for the future, in effect, and the enhancements is really then driving those, what you're looking to drive in the future, effectively.
So I think another thing is we learnt as well is that if you look at the cloud offerings, they're very set, small, medium, large type scenarios. But from an internal IT, you often find that we were reinventing the wheel each time. Each server configuration was going to be different. It was going to be this, it was going to be that, because we meet this project requirement. But by the work that the architecture team are doing and actually defining the standard building blocks, working with the operation teams, it'll actually simplify that massively. We'll have that the same type. The business then has to adapt to actually be able to pick and understand that if they keep within these standard building blocks, we'll get a faster response. But if they deviate and want custom all the time, then obviously it's going to slow down delivery. So I think that's been a help as well.
Okay, so should we have a look at this, the private cloud roadmap, which kind of ties into, there's a question that I've spotted in here. No, it's gone. Sorry. But if it was basically was saying, when you get to the end, not that there is an end, but when you get to the end, what's it going to look like? What's the ideal setup? So how are you going to get yourself there? What are the steps you need to take to get where you want to go?
I think that last slide where with them 3 steps is going to be the foundation for what we do. We'll just do a continual loop around them processes. But the end state is we want, where possible, is everything virtualized. So if we can keep that, we can then have the workload mobility. We can do all the features that virtualization will bring us. We'll have the layer atop then of a good management infrastructure. So we see that within the business, some of the applications they're using are becoming very critical. So you used to always think from an enterprise point of view, ERP systems, that type of stuff. But we're seeing now things like SharePoint are becoming extremely critical to the business because a lot of the business processes and communication is based around it. So with the new Ops Manager, with the application performance monitoring embedded into it, we can actually utilise that now to get some very in-depth SharePoint monitoring, so we can look down at the code level, see where problems are. So things like that, as each product comes on board and now we get used to it, we start utilising its capabilities and actually then just driving through the improvements that we need.
I think the point of going out earlier is if you look at that journey of a good few years there, I mean, that should explain by itself that, you had an idea where you wanted to get to, but, you've taken the small steps and shown the returns to the business and then use that as a way of building on to the next.
Yeah, and for you, it's really been a re-evaluation of really the whole approach to virtualization and management that you've taken to move towards this environment. So what has been some of the drivers behind your choice of change?
I think the key step is we realised we're managing the virtual estate still as a physical. We weren't playing to its advantages. So we also looked across what hypervisor platform we were using. We decided to standardise on one particular version of Hyper-V, and we drive through on that, really. So I think it has been the step through, and it has been little steps across. We've gone through some pain. So as we matured into Hyper-V, we found that the supporting vendor applications weren't keeping up with us. So we're seeing that change now within the marketplace, as in it's coming out at the same time for VMware as it is for Hyper-V. So that's helping us from a delivery point of view and integration. But I think it's definitely just been the small steps that we need, and also working very closely with partners to help us get there.
Yeah, and how have you found things like the management tools and the evolution that they've come across? Because quite often, as we've seen in our research, it's often the investment in the tools and capabilities that is a blocker. And one of the things we've been advocating is much more integrated and comprehensive management out the box, particularly from vendors who are claiming to be cloud friendly.
Yeah, I think one thing that you have to. One thing that we've seen is that a lot of vendors will just tag on the word cloud to an application and then think it will actually do everything that, from a monitoring perspective, we need, or they will deliver a monitoring tool that then has got a lot of pay-for modules. And I think that's, from an enterprise point of view, that's quite challenging because you need to give that level of depth of monitoring, as you said, but you don't want to have to keep paying for every time you want to use something different else. So what we're seeing with the newer versions is that type of stuff is integrated into the tool set without having to pay for it. So we can do transactional monitoring, we can do the in-depth .NET monitoring, we can do all that type of stuff without having to purchase extra modules.
I guess that also the new licensing model from at least Microsoft and the way they're trying to package the whole System Center suite makes it easier for customers as well in terms of leveraging the broader base of the product sets that come as part of it. But naturally, that again has to be tied into the journey or the roadmap, because if you don't see it as part of that, then you see it as overhead. But if you can see the future, then you know that that's going to come. You may be paying it up front, but that's going to come.
And just one of the other things that keeps coming back to us, because we get forever briefed by different vendors around cloud, and they often bring up things like being able to do very granular billing, etc. But again, our research shows that people who are putting in place cloud-like environments tend not to go for very granular billing, but tend to go for a more measured approach, either just reporting on what's being used and how much it costs, or maybe a per user, per year cost. So what have you done around sort of trying to do the financial side of the cloud?
So I think that's the area that we're still actually working on, because we obviously need to look across the whole landscape. So what we're trying to do is actually doing just a show back model, actually show to the business what utilisation actually equates to as a cost. So, for example, if it's good to then be able to compare it, because what the business then will see is prices that are being offered by some of the cloud providers.
Yep.
And actually, from an internal IT perspective, if we can actually show, well, it costs this much, they can understand both ways.
So that kind of helps you with your internal marketing.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's a key point is that, well, if you get this from the cloud, you haven't got all the support model wrapper. So that actually is a cost, and actually we're probably quite comparable to the degree on the cost as well. So it's having that ability to be able to show back to the business the value that IT is actually delivering, and actually potentially what savings we're going to get from it.
Got some more questions. We haven't got an awful lot of time left, so I'll try and get through some of these now, just to get to those. Neil asks, Garry, have you found this project and the people you've worked with has helped you grow as a manager, or has it been a stressful experience? Is that one of your mates?
Is that and/or?
It has helped me grow as a manager, because you have to think cross technology. You cannot work in technology silos. But I think we work this project slightly different than we do normally with our projects. So we delivered this in conjunction with Avanade, but also with the operation teams. So it was very much driven from the operational teams outwards. So they were brought into the journey, basically. What we typically do with a typical infrastructure type project is it would go through its architecture life cycle, design, then the project team would just implement. So we reverse that now, and the operations have been involved all the way through this, and they've actually driven some of the requirements and some of the changes. So by having that, everyone's bought into it. And the teams are actually really excited about actually being able to use the new technology that we've actually got coming in.
Okay. I think that's an interesting point. We've seen the number of engagements we've done where at the end of the engagement you're ready to throw the operations over the wall and nobody's ready to catch it. But something we were just discussing yesterday with Garry, saying, the reason this has been really great for us as well is just because of the engagement with the operations team who's going to hand over from us early in the life cycle. They feel pretty much that they own the designs, they own what's coming. So, trying to push something to them is not the question. They're ready to take it. And I think that's been great, the way it's worked.
And that's actually key, because I was at the Open Data Center Alliance meeting yesterday, and that was one of the keys coming out, is bring those teams up, give them the responsibility. It is about change, but they can own the change and be masters of their destiny. Now they can step up and meet it, but if not, there is a problem to be dealt with. But bringing them in is essential.
Interestingly, they're the ones who've been telling us also how they want to see things as well, because that's the way they want to operate it in the future. So it's been a great way of trying to architect it and then try to get the operational view and try and deliver something to them which works.
So we had set some core principles that we had to work to. Then the rest we just evolved as the project developed. So we understood, because it was all new to us, so we had to basically use the experience from Avanade and the team, but also using our internal experience and actually merging that together to actually deliver where we're going to with this. And the team are actually quite excited now about actually being able to use the technology.
Yep.
So it's probably trying to control the excitement to make sure so we get implemented what we need.
And again, one of the benefits of bringing the team along with you is they actually work with cutting-edge technology. They're not doing the boring old patching and running around and having to deal with the wrath of end users, but they're actually proactive on top of things and dealing with the cutting edge, which is good for the department, good for the company, and good for their long-term career, both within this company or perhaps in the future with another as they change over time.
Okay, another couple of questions. We'll see how many we can get done in the next 5 minutes. You mentioned application teams, says Steve. Do you have any plans to move up into the app stack?
We would support that as a delivery, obviously, because the way Unilever IT is split, there is an infrastructure delivery team and there's an application team. But we will work closely. The two teams have to work closely together. So we, from a monitoring perspective, we may monitor really well in the infrastructure stack, but we're also now working with the application teams to make sure at the application stack we've got that monitoring and level of detail, because the business doesn't care if it's a server problem or if it's an application problem. To them, the service isn't working. Yeah. So it's our job as IT to work together to deliver that, and I think that's something we have to do, and we are doing, and it's just a matter of just improving that and integrating it further.
Okay. What are the really important top 3 or 4 skills that the cloud delivery team need? Ryan says. Pick one if it's easier. Sounds to me like you guys have been talking a lot about communication being kind of really key.
You can't just send, as IT, we just can't send emails to each other. You've got to get off and speak to each other. I think that's
a revolution.
Time. And look at the process. So stepping back, don't think about yourself in a silo. Think of the bigger picture. Really step back and think the big picture. That's a key skill. Yeah. Because small change can have big impact in a different area. So within the cloud, if you've got the shared infrastructure and shared services, you need to understand the impact of what you're doing. So step back, think big picture.
I guess operability of whatever you put in place is key, isn't it, getting to what you've seen happening here? So
because the last thing you want to do is just put something in that's extremely complicated. And that's why we overlaid the manageability of the virtualization platform with the same of the physical platform. So we made sure them two were tightly aligned.
We have a question from Fabian, who has written in twice with this one, sorry. What are the top most labour-intensive operations that you decided to automate?
So, luckily, the next slide shows you that.
Can do that. So we didn't hang on to it for that reason in any way at all. No.
So we stepped back and we looked at work. Some analysis was done up front on time. So we understood what each task did and the time it had an impact. So we concentrated on build automation as one of the first waves. So we've gone to now where a capacity request is made, it comes into our help desk system, and basically system center orchestrator will then basically monitor that queue and then kick off the relevant builds for us. Then we looked at, we've got some core application deployments we have to do. For example, SQL, IIS, which is very common within our estate. So that, again, automation was used for that. It will monitor remedy, and it will basically then kick off the builds as required. So by doing that, we've got a very consistent core application deployment and a build deployment. So it's consistent, it's automated, and it's rapid. So in theory, we could get a load of requests put in, and then the orchestration tools can sit overnight actually just doing the building for us if we've got a big project coming through. And then we could have the production control actually looking at that and just picking up any failures. So it's that type of stuff that this type of orchestration automation will allow us to do. Then we looked at some of the maintenance tasks. So patch maintenance is one of the challenges across an estate, especially when we're doing it at scale. So we looked at automating the patch deployment. So it's a fully automated Hyper-V patch management now. It'll patch, it'll move the guests, and it'll do all that type of stuff to us. Then we looked at it from the monitoring perspective, is what some of the common things that we have to do, service restarts, etc. We could do it different ways, but we decided again to use orchestration because we can put control around it. So now if a service fails, it'll try to automatically recover it a number of times, and if it doesn't, it'll generate the relevant alerts and pass on to the relevant escalation team. We looked at admin account provisioning. We've got to remain compliant, so we've got a set process for admin accounts. So rather than someone there creating accounts, adding the right groups, etc., we can automate that now. We can still put the authorization control in, but it's an automated process.
I guess one of the key things for anybody to look at is what is repetitive. How frequently do you do it in a week, month, or in a year? And I think a bit of that went into the thinking behind picking these out. And the other things is where you're going to get the maximum value as well. Which are the things you rather have automated to free you up to do something more strategic.
And be pragmatic.
Yeah.
Don't spend a year trying to automate something that actually takes 10 minutes to do for a week.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is about that repetitive task and where it's taking a lot of time and manual effort, and also where it's a bottleneck in terms of being able to put things in place. And it comes again down to things like change management process. If you have a change management process for really small things that should be automated, that's probably the wrong use of change management. So you need to test all the automation, and anything that's routine should be done in an automated way, and then deal with the exceptions as they arise, rather than having to approve every minor change.
I mean, to Gary's point, yes, absolutely. Don't do something which will only take you 10 minutes. I think that's critical because automating something, while it sounds simple, it does take a certain amount of effort, building it, testing it, putting it into production, using it repetitively, and then changing as organization change. So keeping that in mind, you want to automate things you're going to get the maximum value from as well.
But one thing as well is from an automation flow is don't be afraid of having to pause the automation flow to do a manual task, then the automation flow then pick it up. Because that still adds value. There is some tasks we might have to do something manual. It just might require.
You can get to stage X and you can do a bit.
Just have a follow-on process that catches up, then kicks off the rest of the automation.
The other thing, of course, is to try and cut down on errors. So quite often misconfiguration when people are doing things manually is justification for trying to automate it and then maybe have a manual approval, but actually have the automation doing some of the reconfig, so it's much more consistent and applied in a way that makes it reliable and resilient.
Absolutely. We'll drive standardization in terms of the service catalog of the services you offer. So, yeah, absolutely, you're right.
And then let's move on to the last slide, well, the last chatty slide anyway. Key learnings and challenges. This is actually even a question as well, so there we go, 2 for 1. What are your key learnings? And you know, if you had to go back to when you began this process and give yourself a top piece of advice.
I think these are the key ones, really. You've got to integrate.
Gary, what are you going to do? Sit down.
It's not a greenfield site. We've got to integrate it in the existing estate, so you've got to make sure that happens. We've got to avoid islands of self-service because you don't want to make it complex for delivery. Because in an enterprise and other organisations, there's got to be landscape delivery. It's not just technology delivery. You've got to step back and review the processes. If you've got something that's inhibiting the actual agility, you need to challenge that process and actually change it if possible. Don't manage infrastructure the way you do physical. Play to virtualization's advantages. That's another key thing we learned. Again, with people, they have to go along the journey. It is them that's actually going to be using this. You can put as many flash tools down as you want, but if people aren't using it, then you're not going to get the benefit. And it's small changes can make a big difference. Just little things can have a big difference into a larger state and actually have quite a lot of cost-saving potential. Also, it's not an end state, it's always a journey. Technology evolves, and you've got to keep open and actually look at the technology and actually keep abreast of that and what's needed to deliver it. I think they're the key things, really. And also, as we've all said, is have a good partner and also work with a good operations team. Make sure the operation teams are a part of that with you. Because if you do it in isolation, you just won't succeed.
Okay. If we then move along, we can see that, sorry, technology pause, we can see that there are some, there's plenty of further reading for anyone who wants to kind of follow up on any of the stuff that we've been talking about today. So there's a whole bunch of links on the site. You can download this presentation at the end so that you can get hold of that. Any final thoughts? Private cloud?
Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Look at what advantages it can actually deliver for you.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you guys for joining us with the questions. And we will see you next time. Thanks very much.